Spawning in the top right-hand corner of 2000 Atmospheres LE, representing Team GP, the South Korean Terran, it is Ryung.
And spawning in the bottom left-hand corner, the Australian Hope, it is the blue Protoss Probe.
Oh boy, and this is a series that I didn't even know if it would happen. I guess it's kind of the elephant in the room, but it's no big surprise. Probe did take a bit of a break after during the December off season. But what's exciting is that, again, like a month or so ago, like he posted on social media that, hey, he was coming back and he was going to take practicing StarCraft seriously.
Yeah, we did see that he was back to streaming at least around a month ago. So he's definitely not just coming into this tournament with no practice. He has been grinding lately, and I'm very curious to see what he has planned for these matchups.
Oh yeah, exactly. Especially because he isn't, he's quite familiar with the Terran race, especially in our region. We don't have as much Zergs as we used to, but he's not up against a Zerg player, right? He's up against a Terran. And what I will say is, especially compared to last year, Ryung, he's no Maru. Right? Like, if you remember, Probe had a really hard time in last year's Katowice with his group. It was a little bit rough. But this is, this is winnable, right?
Yeah, definitely. This is about, I would say, one of the best matchups he could have gotten, even though I think historically his PvT has been one of his weaker matchups. A matchup against Ryung, who himself is, maybe around 6k on career, maybe a bit higher, it's definitely doable.
Yeah, exactly. So hopefully Probe is able to put on a really good showing here. And the other big thing is, like, I also really, I'm curious to see what his skill level is currently, right? Like, I don't know if you've been able to hit him on the ladder. I don't know if he keeps, like, his barcode account hidden at the moment. I know he hasn't been streaming all of his practice, so I don't know if he has something special in store for us.
Yeah, I mean, from catching his first initial streams, it looked like his level was about where it was when he left, honestly. It didn't seem like he'd fallen that much, so yeah, as the Reaper's coming in, it's going to start to dance around the Nexus, but the Adaptive Probe is in position, so it's not going to get any big damage done here.
Yeah, exactly. Some fairly standard openers from our players so far. Even Probe opening up with a Twilight Council, not going for any kind of Stargate or any other kind of crazy shenanigans. So far, nothing too out of the ordinary, per se.
Yeah, and Ryung is opening super standard. Looks like it's going to be some variation of a mine drop. He's just got his bunker on the low ground since he saw Probe went core first, and everything's looking like a very, very standard game.
Yes, and this is why I worry a little bit for Probe, because standard game kind of leads a little bit more to, like, potentially a Widowmine drop coming out from Ryung, and we know how there have been a lot of Protoss players that sometimes struggle against that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason that it's the bread and butter. Like, the Widowmine drop just gives you so much. Not only is there the potential for game-ending damage, but just keeping your opponent's units at home, especially on this map. If the Widowmine drop gets to the corner of the map and can sit between the main and the natural, Protoss has to commit so many Stalkers to stop it dropping. So it's a huge pressure play and definitely a good choice on this map.
Yeah, and I think what's important is that I don't believe Probe has been able to get into the main base of Ryung yet. He's seen a lot of Marines on the front. Like, for all he knows, maybe it's something crazy like a 3 racks opener. So he's still, like, guessing a little bit as to what's going to be coming across the map.
Yeah, I mean, for the standard PvT setup, you usually are going to spread vision like Probe is, with the pylon at the edge of the main and at the third base, so he's going to try and get a circle of vision to see this mine drop coming and hopefully get his Stalkers in position in time.
Yeah, fingers crossed, mate. Blink is about to finish up as well. The Widowmine drop is still making its way across the map, so it looks like Probe may have that just in time for it. But again, it's all about that reaction time, whether he can dive on top of that Widowmine drop and split his probes.
Oh no, the Probe was actually mining the minerals for just a few seconds too short, so it's not going to see the medevac as it goes past the back of the third base. And it's coming in now, and it doesn't look like Probe is quite in position. Oh
god, here we go. The Widowmine drop does come in, but he does notice it. Immediately, he does pull away those probes, so very minimal damage being done here.
Yeah, but the scary thing is Ryung still has one Widowmine, so it comes back to that pressure play that I was talking about earlier, where even though there's only one mine left, and the 2 mines didn't get much damage, Probe is going to have to commit a lot to defending these 2 bases.
Yeah, and you said the 2 mines didn't get too much damage. 2 mines got 5 probe kills. That's not bad at all. Meanwhile, the 3rd mine does burrow, and it will go off. But he's retargeting.
Oh no, I think Blink was slightly off cooldown there because he blinked to try and get the mine, so a Stalker will go down, but at least all the mines are cleaned up for now.
Yeah, this is acceptable damage, you know, like 5 probes, a Stalker. It's not game ending by any means. Probe has survived this initial drop.
Yeah, ideally you would want to hold this kind of thing with only losing 2 probes, maybe 3, so it definitely could have been cleaner, but it could have been a lot worse for sure.
We've seen a lot worse, mate. Oh god. But yeah, now Probe, he is the one with map control. He's moving out across the map. He has Blink, so if he wants to, he could try and say Blink into the main base, try and pick off whatever he can. But you know, he's just testing the waters for now, and we see that Ryung is looking to get into a later game with the start of that 3rd base.
Yeah, and it's definitely a good setup for Ryung. He's got his 3-axe already. He's going into mine production, and back on Probe's side of the map, he's going to just be playing 3 gas into Storm. So that very heavy Zealot style with the fast +1 armor where you just want to survive against the initial 3-axe pressure and then maybe retaliate with a Templar drop of your own.
Yeah, it's something that you could argue is a little bit risky, but it also has a really big snowball effect. Obviously, you're taking a risk by skipping out and delaying things like Colossus production and that kind of splash damage, but if you do manage to survive until Storm finishes, like, there's a lot of, like, explosive potential there for you.
Yeah, you often see, like, in these pretty normal games where Terran can't quite pressure the Protoss that's going Storm, the Protoss will just come across the map with a bunch of Archons, a prism full of Templar, and can sometimes just end the game right there and then if the Terran isn't set up exactly how he wants to be, but Ryung is going to make his first initial foray across the map now.
Oh yeah, thankfully Probe is in position and he's slowly going to chip away at this army as it comes across the map. He can start preparing as well. Thankfully, he threw down his gateways earlier, so they should more or less be ready in time for this, so we can warp in. But yeah, we'll see how Ryung does. There's a lot of potential there with not just his tanks, he's also got a Raven in the mix as well.
Yeah, this is the Probe classic we're seeing here, the gateways spread around the map to get ready for those later game Zealot warp-ins. It's really like how he likes to play this style with the counterattacks, but looks like Ryung wants to get in position between the main and the Nashville with these tanks and maybe take out this pylon, which is definitely going to be pretty painful. Yeah,
it's a really nice pick off there by Ryung. He does shut down some of this production. Only 1 gateway, so not the biggest of deals, but again, it's going to be disastrous if, say, somehow, some way that Cybercore gets sniped.
Yeah, now you have to be really scared as Probe positions his army in his main. Not only can Ryung run up into the area between the Natural and 3rd, but he can also threaten to drop with support of the tanks, which is what he's going to start doing now.
Yeah, exactly. The drop play has begun. The first gateway goes down. There are Stalkers here in position. It looks like he's going to be able to push this away for the time being. Ooh, even snipes a medevac.
Yeah, nice pick off there, as on the other side of the map, Probe has just warped in a ton of Zealots and they're going into the Natural, but Ryung is very much in position for this. These Zealots aren't going to get anything done.
Ah, yeah, feels bad, man. Unfortunately for Probe, there were reinforcements waiting at home. They do get into the middle line, and they're going to pick off a couple of SCVs, but nowhere near as much as they could have gotten.
Yeah, and the main of Probe is very much under siege. Losing the core is going to be really painful. There's going to be no more Stalker warp wins for a little sec here. As Probe comes in, but yeah, there's so many mines and 3 auto turrets get placed.
Oh my god, exactly. At least he is able to bait out those auto turrets, so there's not going to be a lot of energy left on that Raven if he tries to push in again, but Ryung just keeps on going. He drops even more into the main.
Yeah, and behind this, Probe Storm isn't even halfway done. I don't think there's many Archons on the map. He's going to go in now. There's 1 Archon. The Sentry is going to really help with the Guardian Shield. He might be able to clean up this army on the low ground, but at what cost?
Oh, it's so close. He did get all the Widow Mines, he did get the tanks, but there's still plenty of fire. It looks like with these reinforcing Zealots, it looks like Probe will just barely hold on.
Yeah, and the Marines are still treading really well against the Zealots, but here comes the second army of Ryung, and I think the Probe is battered and beaten, and he might not be able to hold this push.
Yeah, exactly. He just needs a little bit more time. He needs another warp in, but oh god, really awkwardly he's trying to get out of his base. There are so many Widow Mines!
Beautiful connections on the Zealots, and because of the way that he's pushing, the shield battery is not going to be able to provide support for the units of Probe, and they're all going to fall.
Yeah, the overcharge popped a little bit prematurely there. It doesn't really add to the fight whatsoever. And now Ryung, he is snowballing. I'm just so, like, look at how many Widow Mines there are. That's insane. That's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, there was never any detection, I guess. I don't know if Probe had to skip Observer production to get out more units, but these mines are all coming back online, and these Zealots have no chance.
Yeah, exactly. We did see that first storm of the game, but again, it was a little bit too late. Storms, maybe they could have helped out earlier. GG gets called. Ryung will take the first game.
Yeah, that was a super clean game from Ryung. A very, very textbook game from both players in the early game, but Ryung just had that small edge with the mine drop that
Hmm.
just led to a almost unstoppable push, it looks like.
Yeah, yeah, it's a shame that that even though Probe saw it coming, like he wasn't really able to stop Ryung from setting up outside his main base the way he did. And on top of that, like that Zealot run by didn't really accomplish too much either. Like Ryung was more than ready for any kind of counterattack.
Yeah, he was. Yeah, I'm not sure if those Zealots being at home might have swayed the fight a lot more in Probe's favor. It did feel like he was on the back foot as
Mm,
the drops of Ryung were getting supported by those tanks in the back, and it's just so hard to engage into that because it's not like you can surround it with Zealots, come from every angle, and then the Terran has to pick up. It's like you have to split up your army, where Terran can just pick up and go to the other side at any time.
mm.
Yeah, very, very difficult to get a very decisive fight on that army.
Yeah. Oof. And with that, Ryung does take an early lead in this series, but again, it's a best of 3. Probe still has a chance at making a comeback happen there. But I'm a little bit worried just because game 1 was so relatively straightforward, right? Like there was nothing too fancy about it. It was just that Ryung executed his push, like his build, his opener, his push, and it all just kind of worked out well for him.
Yeah, it must really say something about Ryung's confidence going into this. In my mind, he's not that much of the favorite here, but maybe in his mind he knows that as long as he takes it to a standard game where he's in control after the early game, that he'll have really good shot at winning.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if that's the mentality that he has. At the same time, you know, because now he's up 1-0, maybe he's more willing to spread his wings a little bit more and, and have a little bit more fun. I don't know. We'll see. As we are getting ready for game number 2, and we already have our lobby. Looks like it's going to be on Hardwire.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm too familiar with which maps are best in this matchup. I know that usually the Terran player will veto the longer maps and the Protoss player will veto the shorter maps just because of how pushes in the matchup work. So Hardwire, definitely one of the longer maps. Not sure there's too many tank spots, great tank spots either. I would definitely say 2000 is probably a better map for Terran. So we'll see if Probe can win on what I believe is his map pick.
Yeah, and I think the other thing to add on to that as well is that Probe, after maybe taking a loss in game 1, maybe he's going to approach this a little bit differently. I don't know if going for a proxy is necessarily the best move, but on this map specifically, I remember like ANZ champs. Do you remember his game against Seether where he proxy Stargated with the Void Rays and the Tempest?
Yeah.
We could see a return of that. I don't know.
Yeah, definitely a reasonable shot here, especially after game 1 went. I would be thinking as Probe, like, what can I do to throw this guy off of his plan? Because he's obviously so practiced with this standard style that it's almost suicidal going up against it.
Exactly. Like, I know we've been kind of talking a lot from Probe's perspective, but Ryung, he's an amazing player in his own right. He has a lot of history, especially with the Cranky Ducklings. Like, for people who may be newer followers of the Cranky Ducklings, like, our roots lie in Axiom. That's where Ryung was back in the day, and that's where he kind of rose to prominence. I guess layers before that, but oh boy, we'll see. We'll see how this series goes as spawning in the top right-hand corner of Hardwire LE, we have the Australian Hope, the Australian Protoss representing Legacy Esports. It is Probe.
And spawning in the bottom left-hand corner, the Korean player who might be making waves this tournament, it is Team GP's Ryung.
Ryung already opening up with a little bit of mind games here, throwing down his first racks over at his third base location.
Yeah, this is a play that we used to see so often. Back in the GSL winning streak of Maru, it felt like he was doing this almost every other game, where it became almost a meme that Maru never makes his buildings inside his base. It's always going to be somewhere on the map, and you have no idea where, so...
Yeah, it's you're very right about that, and that's the scary thing about this, right? Probe, he is going for a probe scout. He is going to see the lack of racks in the main base, and now it's on him to determine whether or not he needs to send another probe out to scout for a proxy, or if it is kind of like a fake.
Yeah, I guess the good news is if I was Probe, I would probably scout the area where the Rax is immediately because it's probably the most common area that a Rax would be proxied if it was being faked, but it looks like Probe is just going to check the back of the natural first and send another Probe out on the map.
Yeah, he does send that second probe out. Just kind of in a weird way, like a beeline across the map as well as Nikena. He's also trying to scour the map for that proxy. Unfortunately, he still hasn't checked it, and he's actually checking, it looks like, the triangular third instead.
Yeah, the scary thing about this kind of proxy is because it's a double gas, you basically know 100% that it's going to be a proxy barracks for at least one Reaper. But because of how Reapers operate with the jumping cliffs and with their speed, the racks could literally be anywhere, whereas if it was a proxy Marauder, say, it more has to be within walking distance of the Protoss Naturals, so it's going to be really hard for Probe to identify what's going on.
Yeah, and now finally he does, as the first Reaper actually rocks up at home, cleaning up that probe. But the damage has already been done. You know, there was a lot of extra lost mining time with all those probes. Probe even had to chrono out a Zealot as well, just to be safe. So yeah, inadvertently, damage was done to Probe's economy.
Yeah, and the problem is he had to make this Zealot and everything before he actually started his Nexus, so... Although it'll probably balance out because Ryung did open one base with quite a late CC on the high ground. It's definitely not looking too hot for Probe here.
Yeah, I'm a little bit surprised by that as well. Like Ryung, even he throws down a bunker as well. I mean, I guess you can always salvage a bunker, but Ryung playing this very safe. As there we go, he does cancel it.
Yeah, the scary thing about these openers often is since your barracks is out on the map and you need to float at home, you don't have the marine count that you would need to stop a player that, let's say, chronoed their first adept with a core first. If you made your CC on the low ground and they did that, there's no way you'd be able to hold that with just a Reaper. So that is the reason that Ryung is opening CC on the high ground, and it's going to be at least a small victory for Probe in a game that is definitely not looking too great for him.
Yeah. So some damage done on both sides there. But now we're getting into a bit more of a standard game. A bit more, as we do see Ryung is opening up with a couple extra of these racks, is delaying his start port a little bit more, and just going more for that marine production instead. Yeah,
and this is a great hallucination scout from Probe. Opening Sentry in this matchup has become more and more rare lately, with Protoss is usually opening, you know, variations of Adept and Double Stalker so that they can have a lot of units in position for the pressure. So the Hallucination Scout, actually a brilliant move from Probe. He's going to know exactly what's coming.
Yeah, exactly. So now his mind can rest a little bit easier here, from his perspective anyway, as he is working on that blink. Rober's already done, so I wouldn't be surprised if, I don't know, maybe he does end up throwing down a Warp Prism just to make use of that mobility that he has. But yeah, I mean, because of that scout, he knows that, hey, this time there isn't going to be a Widowmine drop.
Yeah, and we see this game already a bit of a variation. Probe is going up to 4 gases quite fast, whereas in the last game we see it on 3 gases. And he still hasn't taken the third base, which is leading me to start thinking that he might play as if this is just a normal 3-racks opener, because this obviously isn't the 3-racks before factory build that's become quite standard in the matchup. He did have a factory before he started the second and third racks, I believe, so 2-base Colossus isn't actually going to be as amazing versus this as it would be against someone that went 3-racks without a factory.
Yeah, like we've talked about this scenario before, where kind of opening up Colossus does kind of hard counter 3-racks openers, just because Bio has a really hard time dealing with the Colossus once they come out, especially with the extended thermal lance. But because of Ryung's opener, like, he's not going to be in as much of a bad position. So yeah, it's interesting how these like builds themselves have turned out.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I've ever seen the opening from Ryung before, at least in TVP, where you go 3-racks before the starport. It's definitely a cool style where you're going to look to put on a lot more pressure with much later medevacs, but I guess because of the timings of the Stim and others, that the medevacs aren't actually going to be too late, and they will hit with all the upgrades.
Exactly, the medevacs are almost done, so I'm pretty sure shortly Ryung will be sending it across the map. Meanwhile, the first Colossus is already on the way, but again, it's all about Probe keeping an eye on when those drops move out and whether or not he is in position to defend against them. Like we've seen time and time again, you know, drops that can maybe even catch the Colossus off guard, as it's already starting to move out.
Yeah, and I wouldn't actually be surprised if Ryung pulls a few workers here, since he is adding the extra gas, but he has actually completely cut SCV production for the time being, so... I'm not sure if that's just so he can afford constant unit production while dropping the third base, or if he's planning something a bit more sinister.
Yeah, yeah, I wouldn't have been surprised either. We can see that in the end he does throw down a third TC, which is a bit of a shame. I would have loved to have seen him pull some boys. Would have been great, but that's not what we're seeing here. But he's still moving out, and oh, it looks like the position of that second observer on the right-hand side. Beautiful. Probe does spot the drop.
Yeah, and the observer at the front sees the move out as well, so Probe has exactly all the vision he needs to stop this. Let's just see if he has the unit count.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the Stalker's already here in the main base. Blink is done. We even have a shield battery in position. And look at this. We even have an army to support that Colossus at the third. So Probe is ready for both pushes.
Yeah, and I wonder if he's keeping the Stalkers a bit further back from the cliff so that he can blink in to snipe medevacs if they come in right away. If Ryung, say, misses the scan. But he will see, and he will know to drop them on the low ground.
Yeah, yeah. Really smart scan by Ryung because, as you said, I'm sure Probe wanted to bait it in and then dive on top of it as soon as possible. So now Ryung knows to be a little bit more conservative and save his boost. So now he's just chilling, waiting, biding his time outside that third base as he does finish up his own third TC and is getting ready to take it.
Yeah, and the other thing is Probe hasn't taken his extra gases at his third base yet, so I wonder if he's going to go for a bit of a retaliatory move with the Colossus range upgrade and +2, and maybe just look to kill Ryung outright once he takes his third.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite possible, right? Especially because Ryung doesn't have everything at home to defend. Meanwhile, Probe, he's moving out. It is spotted by a spotter Marine, but we do see that Probe isn't really committing to anything yet.
Yeah, and we see the proxy gateway of Probe coming up again. He loves to play with these Zealot run-bys while the Terran is moving out across the map, so not surprised at all to see it this game, and he will go up to the extra gases and take his fourth base, so it looks like we're getting into a very standard macro setup here as Ryung gets into his Ghost production.
Exactly. Not just Ghost production, he's also started to work on those Vikings as well, which will help against those Colossus. And Probe, I imagine, is going to want to start diversifying his splash damage soon. He's getting that second robo up for double robo production. So we could be seeing, you know, some disruptors at some point.
Yeah, and this is almost the weakness of Probe, is that when it gets to these stages where Terran never moves out and Probe can't make use of his Zealot run-bys, he'll end up using a lot of minerals on these almost wasted attacks where Ryung is sitting at home anyway and he's not going to take damage from the run-bys, so we'll have to see if Probe commits really heavily into these Zealot run-bys or if he is greedier, which he probably could be in this case.
Yeah. Fingers crossed, right? Fingers crossed, because we have seen, as you said in the past, where he can struggle against not just him, but other players as well, struggle against a more passive player like this, so hopefully Probe is able to take full advantage of that. So far, so good. Like, he's throwing down his second forge. He is getting the rest of his gases there at his fourth base. You could argue maybe he could even try and take another. Ooh, actually goes for a bit of a cheeky Dark Shrine.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not even sure if this is cheeky Dark Shrine. I mean, we've seen this matchup play out so many times in the late game where Protoss just wants to get to that Disruptor Blink DT army where the Blink DTs can kill a fourth base at any second, and Probe's got such a healthy work account that I'm almost not surprised to see him throw it down this early just to work on the Blink upgrade a bit sooner.
Yeah, you're not wrong. You're not wrong. The unfortunate truth is that mass blink DTs are quite common nowadays. Thankfully, I'm not a player that has to deal with that here in this matchup. Thank God. But we'll see if we even get there because it's still on the way. Ryung is in the middle of moving out. We do have a bit of a Zealot run by, but it is spotted. Oh
yeah. The MPs do miss the majority of the army, but it's definitely looking scary here. Ryung's army is quite huge with a ton of Vikings that almost invalidate the Colossus.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know if you saw there, but the first disruptor did already go down, going a little bit too close to those tanks. Ryung in the end thinks better of it. He doesn't push out yet, which I feel like is a good thing for Probe because he is allowing Probe to finish up that Dark Shrine and get ready for those DT run-bys.
Yeah, and I'm kind of surprised here that we're just getting into another super standard setup where the Protoss is going for the classic Blink DT with Disruptors, with Colossus, with Stalker Zealot, and Ryung is just getting into his Viking production, starting his +1 air up and adding his extra barracks.
Oh, and somehow, some way, both armies have completely missed each other. Probe does spot Ryung's army with a spotter Zealot, but he doesn't turn around, he doesn't falter, he's going to keep on going, and we may end up in a bit of a base trade.
Yeah, and as I've heard from my Terran friends, usually these base trades end up favoring the Protoss, since Protoss can kill 1 or 2 bases and then recall and save the rest. But a lot of Probe's army just sitting there, not quite going for the big base trade yet, but Ryung comes in, he kills a Disruptor, he takes out a base.
Yeah, it looked like Probe was maybe microing back at home. He did end up connecting one Purification Nova with Ryung's army, as he does warp in a couple of those DTs. Again, Probe, he recalls back home.
Yeah, he doesn't even take out the natural CC. Oh, the Disruptor gets taken down before it takes out too much, but the Disruptors are walking forwards and they're getting EMP'd.
They are, but the flanking DTs get on top of all of the tanks, and Probe annihilates the army of Ryung. What does he have left? He has Vikings, but it doesn't even matter. There aren't any Colossus left.
Yeah, and at home, Probe actually left a bunch of units and killed the third CC of Ryung, I believe. So, or unless he just moved it slightly, but Probe has such a big bank. This is looking really, really good for him.
Yeah, Ryung, he's down to 2 bases. Ryung was in the middle of expanding and taking 4th base, by the way, but a Zealot run-by actually shut that down. We see the blink on forward. There's no tanks, there's no Widowmines, there's no backbone to Ryung's army, and the Ghost Academy was sniped earlier.
Yeah, Probe's up 50 supply. I think he's got this. I don't see how Ryung can hold this. He's just got a few Marines left.
Yeah, that's it. GG gets called. The Australian Hope does it. He takes a game off of Ryung.
Let's go.
Let's go. Oh god, I don't know how, but Ryung, I guess he didn't have his spotted Marines exactly where he needed them. Like, it took him so long to recognize that Probe was going for that base trade. Meanwhile, Probe, he knew exactly where the army of Ryung was and where it was going.
Yeah, Probe had actually a beautiful circle of Zealots spread out on the map that it was impossible for him to ever miss a move out like that. So that was a really good move from him. And then I think that when Probe recalled, he managed to get on top of all of the medevacs right when they lifted up and took out a ton of full medevacs.
Yeah, he took out the full medevacs. He was able to deny bases. Ryung, this time, he honestly didn't really have a lot at home to kind of stop the push from Probe either, or just slow it down. Yeah, that was great. And the DTs even came into play as well. Like, the DTs got a full surround of all those tanks, and there was no scan at all. Like, there was nothing that Ryung could do.
Yeah, that was definitely very well played from Probe there after what I thought would be a pretty shaky early game with having to make the Zealot and etc. But I guess the fact that Ryung had to take the high ground CC and did open with a bit of an unorthodox opening with the 3-acts before starport, that maybe it put Probe back into it. And yeah.
Especially because, like, it didn't really do anything, right? Like, he opened up with a relatively aggressive opener, and the drops never got into the main base. Like, Probe was so on point with his vision and his positioning that Ryung just never pulled the trigger on anything, so he himself was forced to be a little bit more passive than he would have liked. Yeah, that was just a solid game.
Yeah. I mean, already this series is pretty sick. We haven't seen too much crazy stuff, and I know that often the crazy stuff is very entertaining, but as a player myself, I love seeing these games where both players play super standard, where no crazy stuff happens, and we just see the pure skill of both players going up against each other.
Exactly, mate, exactly. And now it all comes to fruition here in the ace match. We are diving into game number 3. As a reminder, this is a best of 3, so this is where it all ends. One player will move on to the next round. The other won't be eliminated yet. There is a lower bracket in the round of 36.
Yep, and we'll have to see if Probe can close out the series and maybe send Ryung to the lower bracket. It's hard to cast this series without bias, but, just because, you know, Probe is Probe, but I do love Ryung too. Maybe not quite as much, but I've always loved watching his streams.
Definitely. And here he is, the Maru coach himself, the Tuna, the South Korean Terran. In the top right-hand corner of Glittering Ashes, we have Ryung.
And spawning in the bottom left corner, tying up the series in the last game in a pretty crazy base trade, it's Legacy Esports, the Australian Protoss, Probe.
I want to quickly exclamation mark Funada Sinistro here. I don't think you can see it, but at the moment the SC2 logos mod is set up so that Probe is actually Rogue.
What?
I do know that production can switch that off, so it's not the biggest deal, but yeah. This is Probe, not Rogue. For those wondering.
Yeah, I know it probably looked like Rogue in the last game.
True.
But yeah, I mean, I don't even know if Probe is still on Legacy these days. I'm not sure since he moved to Age if he has still been streaming under Legacy, but
yeah.
Yeah, we do see the eBay block here, and I know that a lot of Protosses as part of their build will check for this eBay. And I think if you check for it early, you get a slight lead. So I think in this case, the game is pretty even, from what I know.
Oh boy, yeah. I mean, this makes a lot of sense to me, just because I do know that Maru does this quite a bit as well. So you know, if Ryung does it, Maru probably does it as well, and yeah, it's just a bit of an annoying way to slip up the opener of the Protoss, and force out that Zealot again, right?
Yeah, and at home, Ryung is just going to be opening super standard with his CC on the low ground. There's not going to be too much mind games here, although I do believe that Probe was actually pushed back by the Marine before he confirmed if there was a CC on the low ground. So Probe might actually expect a proxy here.
Oh, yeah, he may expect that. So, I mean, he has been scouting a little bit diligently. He still has a probe out on the map as well. But actually, he just... So, yeah, he is checking, but he is setting his Zealot immediately across the map. Do you think he can get here in time to maybe even delay that CC?
Yeah, we'll have to see. I think the bunker will get up in time, but Probe can always run past it with a Stalker and maybe try to be a bit aggressive, since there's only 3 Marines out right now.
Oh boy, exactly. But the bunker finishes up just in time. Marines do get in, and oh, Probe doesn't risk it. He doesn't risk getting behind that mineral line and trying to get sniped at SCV.
Yeah, and it's definitely a nice move to move out with the units like this, just to confirm the scout on the CC so that you know you're not getting proxied, since obviously if you try and dive with the probe, if the Marines are slightly outside, you won't actually see the CC, so... A nice move from Probe. He'll confirm exactly what he's going up against, and it looks like we might get into another pretty standard game with Probe opening blank.
Oh, yeah. Once again, we see that Twilight Council opening. It's a bit of a shame that we haven't had too much diversity. Like, none of these games has Probe tried to go for like a Stargate opener into like Phoenixes or anything, which we do typically see on larger maps like Glittering Ashes.
Yeah, obviously going for those Phoenixes. So since sometimes it can leave you vulnerable if you open Phoenixes, but on the big maps, it's so easy to get counter damage done as soon as the Terran moves out. But yeah, we do see a pretty standard opening. Ryung actually going a medevac, so it looks like he's going to do a few mines and maybe a few Marines in a drop.
Yeah, that's what it seems like. It's not going to be too many Widow Mines here, but of course he will be moving out with them, going for that bit of a cheeky drop. We saw how good the defense was earlier from Probe in game number 1. We'll see if he still got it in game 3.
Yeah, and behind this, Ryung going with the 2-1-1 setup. I feel like this is a very modern way to play the matchup, where you get the racks almost earlier than you normally would if you were playing with a 3-1-1 transition. But when you get the 2-1-1, you get the stim faster, you get your Marine production online sooner, so it's a really interesting development that I think has happened quite recently.
Yeah. And we'll see how it pans out here for Ryung, as he is now across the map with that Widowmine drop. He's just kind of chilling. Okay, there we go. Now he is sending it into that mineral line, but again, only 2 Widowmines.
Yeah, and Probe's pylon is in position so that it will see the medevac drop. We'll see if he actually sees it, but definitely has the tools to hold it here. I don't know if he has anything in position in the natural, though.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like it. The first one might have... No, there's the reaction! No!
Oh my god, 6 workers is probably as good as you can get with a mine. The second one will be avoided, so at least that's something for Probe, but definitely a huge blow here.
Yeah,
as the observer gets picked off.
Feels bad, man. At the same time, Probe is outside the main base of Ryung with his Stalkers, but doesn't really pull the trigger. Like, he does have Blink, but he doesn't quite have any high ground vision, so he can't really abuse that or utilize that. The second tank for Ryung finally pops out of the main base, so now he does have both bases covered.
Yeah, it's a similar situation on Glittering as in 2000, where there's this dead space behind the main where the medevac could go to the main or the natural mineral line, and Probe's going to have to commit twice as many units as he normally would to defending.
Yeah, exactly. And now I just... we'll see if Probe can get some damage done. I mean, he's going to chip away at the bunker, which is nice. He picks up 1 SCV, which again is something, but nowhere near as much as what he received.
Yeah, and we see him going into the three gas style again with the +1 armor and the storm. I would almost like him to see him, or maybe he'd be too greedy this game, but going into that 1-1 style that I think we've seen more often from Protosses, where you play quite greedy, maybe 2 gases and go up to 4 bases, because if you go into this normal storm style, I don't know if you're leading into Ryung's strengths.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? Especially because it didn't really work out in game number 1. What you're specifically talking about is like more of that Haas style, right? That mass gateway where you kind of delay your splash damage. You rely so much more on your gateway units to defend and to survive long enough to end up getting your storm. But I guess maybe Probe isn't too comfortable with that. Maybe he's not well practiced with it.
Yeah, this is definitely how almost every Protoss was playing, I guess, in the period right before he left. It's more of a recent development that a lot of the Korean Protosses have been opening with the fast 1-1 and playing a mass gate style where you're hoping that the Terran moves out and doesn't quite get a spot on your gases. But this Observer is going to see the job, which is very nice. This Observer positioning, as on the last map, is really paying dividends.
Yeah, exactly. You know, we have a bit of a sneaky double drop here. It does immediately get spotted. Hopefully, Probe was checking, and yep, he was. He does even warp into Stalker back in that main base. But we do have a scan from Ryung, so he's aware that Probe knows.
Yeah, but I'm really worried that this situation is looking extremely similar to Game 1, where Ryung is pushing with a tank mine force. At least he's not going to be able to abuse the terrain maybe as much as 2000, where he's still going to be able to set up below the main and start dropping, though.
Yeah, that's what I'm really worried about, because Probe unfortunately wasn't in position to deny this. He was instead protecting his third base when really the army was coming straight towards his natural base. And again, Probe just hasn't seen this until now.
Yeah, the ring of Probe just has a big hole of it right in the middle, and that's the ring that Ryung is going to end up exploiting here as he takes out the buildings in the wall.
Oh my god, takes out a Robo as well. We do have a couple of these High Templar being morphed in, but there we go. We even have an anti-armor missile on the majority of the Zealots.
Yeah, and I mean, it's looking really tricky for Probe to break this, but he does have quite a high Zealot count with +1 armor done. No Storm yet, but he's going to come in now for the fight. Can he dodge the Widow Mines well? Oh, a lot of the Zealots take a ton of damage from the Widow Mines.
Every single Zealot is going down here. What's unfortunate is that there is no Storm in production, so it's not going to be ready at all for this fight. And this is only half of Probe's army, like it's all getting picked apart.
Yeah, this is the weakness of the Storm openers, is you just don't have that backbone that Colossus gives you. And these pushes can be deadly.
Yeah, exactly. As we can see here, Ryung, he's just pushing in towards the third base. And Probe, he just can't really deal with this at all. Like, he's just such in an awkward position. The Archons are even getting picked off, and GG gets called.
Yep, GG.